"Ah," was all the colonel had to say about the report, vocalized about halfway through. He sat a moment longer, then asked, "That's all they sent?" "Up to the current hour, sir," the aide replied plainly.
Think it was the Russians."
The colonel had fallen into a mumble, causing the aide to ignore the question. After rereading the handwritten pages, the colonel stood from his desk, seemed to take in a map of the United States on the wall, then returned to his seat, defeated.
"I suppose we'll pass this on. We're the only secure link to Westcom now,"
he said, still quietly and apparently for himself.
"Guess that overrun zone will hold them up. Hold them up and... yes, well, you know..."
His voice became louder and more formal. "It's better that we make the key developments here, more firmly within the States." The aide still didn't have anything they were permitted to say.
He's like a secret weapon, our man. What they say, you've seen what they said. He's the one, and this is only the beginning. Stable doses, and he could adapt to carry on through mortality, in real time. All this won't matter then."
He gestured at the report. The aide agreed politely. They began to leave, but were stopped in the door by an officer in battle gear. "The captain is here," the aide reluctantly chimed. The captain moved past the aide and closed them outside the office.
"Yes, you've been reading over the secretary's shoulders, haven't you?"
the colonel said with an undue sinister streak. The captain apologized and stood to attention. The colonel forgot to set him at ease.
"You're going to ask about the ventilation cell, aren't you?"
"He's ready, sir," the captain said.
"Not for what will happen once he gets in there, no. Neither are we,"
the colonel said, taking himself to the high window, its sill at his chin.
"We'll have to clean up around here," he mumbled.
"Shall I get started?"
"On the cleaning, yes, and prepare a media package for the Vector."
"Yes, sir. I presume that, given the circumstances, any and all measures necessary are authorized?"
"They'll have to be, or it's lights out once those Russians get here."
"Russians, sir?"
"That's what the quiet means, Captain. Never been any different. No Bucky."
The colonel trailed off again. Outside the office building, sharp cracks occasionally echoed from the distant woods beyond the camp's earthen wall. The soldiers cheered at each other every time. They hadn't received the news from Westcom yet. The world was starting to get very small. Like a proud parent, I basked in the glory of my single cornstalk, now taller than me. It had built up the courage to have another go at growing, and had tripled in size overnight. Now it was still again, surely pondering its next stunning spurt. It was really working, the actual intended use of the nightmare disease, or one of them anyway. If that stalk could be made to spit out infinite regenerating food, I guess that's something to celebrate. Although, I wonder what upheavals such a godless wonder would bring to the world, even at the best of times. If nobody had to worry about food supplies anymore, would recklessness take hold and the country be burned, warred upon, or otherwise killed off in some fashion to mimic a fairy tale moral? Probably. If only everyone were more caring, like me, I thought, checking my ammunition and hauling guns to the roof for the next rampage. I had added a second layer to my junk barricades, granting me an undue sense of confidence. In truth, it was me scrambling over this new barrier to get away from the onslaught of monsters that night. They came thick and fast, no longer confused by these constructions. They broke through the weak point of the first wall, and soon overcame the shoddier build of the second. This brought them to the reverse side of the roof, where they could lumber down upon me at speed. I was dragging my bundle of weaponry this way and that, still faster than the pursuers, but only barely. In need of a way to cut them down more quickly, one was provided. One of the horde had a shotgun with a drum magazine. I undid the belt, holding it across its calloused back, and could see at once that it was fully loaded. Slots in the magazine revealed bright red shells. With no delay to be afforded, I fired off 14 shells, one after the other, tumbling the foe backwards as the pellets ripped through the leaders and lodged in those behind. We had a real chemistry, me and the new guy. Brought me a little time to get the rest of my magazines in order. I'd have to keep an eye out for more drums, not that I could really manage carrying even more hardware in my battle pack. Also featured that night were streaks of screaming green. Some of the super zombies were here, and their powers had increased yet further. Not only were they bullet resistant, but they were jumping cleanly over both my stockades at once, falling down on me from the red sky. They let out a shriek when they did this, handily alerting me to the danger, yet still adding to the feeling that I was fighting for my life. One good jump from those things, and I'd be flying off the roof to my demise. Perhaps not such a bad way to go. I could handle a broken spine, but if I went down in a pile of clawing undead, would they even leave enough of me behind to reanimate? They didn't actually eat their victims, like Hollywood zombies, mind you. Once the bacteria was suitably spread, the work was done, I think. So I had that going for me. These stupid microbes wanted me captured alive, as did the even more stupid humans, no doubt watching my struggle from the dark mountain. What am I even moaning about, then? I struggled from about 10 at night until 5 the following morning, hungry, thirsty, covered in bruises, scratches, gore, and even a swift healing burn from some bird acid. The barricades were in a poor state, which didn't really lower their effectiveness now the zombies weren't stopping to check out my terrible craftsmanship. I barely checked that the main building was clear before heading right to bed, then spending what remained of the day trying to cheer myself up by cooking ration tins on a little fire. The corn swayed in the wind, no crops yet to speak of. Turns out I was really close to harvest though, which I discovered when I was rudely awoken just after midnight. The wake-up call was delivered by a drooling greenish fellow in denim, whose unbalanced gait scraped audibly into the workshop. Fortunately, I was finished waking up by the time he was halfway to my bed. I danced away, taking up the loaded shotgun and firing. Annoyingly, a lot of the splatter ended up going all over said bed. The 2 shots I'd let out seemed to start a trend. There was a quick round of rifle fire from right outside. I dashed to the window. The Night Fairy armoured car was reversing out of the main gate, dismembered zombies squirming in its wake. They were clearly escaping rather than helping here. Or more accurately, my bloodied bedspread was their fault. My flashlight was too dim to see what they'd been up to out there, so I sallied out to get closer. The ground floor was crawling with hostiles, although of the variety not hyped up by mist. My single shotgun drum was enough to secure the area. I'm not sure if the fairies delivered those guys to me, or if they just came in pursuit of them. I optimistically suspect the latter, based on something they did deliver. Like a good dad, I went right to my corn plant. It was bulging with cobs all of a sudden, as big as any GM farm would have managed, only they'd sprung up in about 4 hours since I'd last checked. One of them had been taken, a nub remained, and there was also a trench that had been scooped out along the edge of the planter. Punk teens stealing from my farm, huh? And the mud? Well, it was pretty special mud. Keeping to the honour system, the fairies had paid for their samples with a little plastic case. It was a first aid kit's case painted black. I unclipped the latches and received a map. It was actually a map I already had, the standard survey of the local county, and indeed mine was in better condition. However, this army map had been defaced with red ink. They had drawn in the infection zone borders and circled my depot. From there, a long arrow directed me to unfold the sheet to its full extent, where it ended at another circled spot in some woods. It was labelled, "Safety cell is ready. You'll know when you find it, all yours. More info when you get there, good luck." I think it was that captain, based on the writing. Safety cell. I remembered Hassan writing safety to me. Wonder what happened to them. I took the map inside and was about to slump down on the bed to study it before I remembered the situation there. Interestingly, the zombie responsible had already left, so clearly I didn't shoot him that hard. Perching on the edge of a bench, I determined it would take a couple of days to get to this safe spot. Or in other words, about the amount of time I still had food or ammo for. This left me with two choices: loot Harpertown to buy more time, or see if the safety cell had the mother of all vending machines for me. I had amassed a fortune of 10,000 chips from my attackers' pockets, adding to the similar fortune locked up in my penthouse in Arrowhead. By around 3:30 I'd made my choice. With the saddlebags loaded up, I pedalled off from the scrapyard, giving my corn planter thumbs up. I had the cobs tied to the top of my rucksack. I rode for 2 hours to navigate my way across Harpertown. I was headed southeast, into terrain that looked to be heat-rayed as far as the eye could see. I stopped to sit on the hood of a clean white car blocking the road out of town, ate some breakfast, told myself that I really shouldn't overthink this, then spent hours riding and overthinking this, specifically thinking of how the safety cell could actually be all manner of things, and that this basic trickery might be worth avoiding. The thing was, I wanted it badly. That is to say, I wanted the promises to be real, and I wanted to see my captors again, and I wanted to be told that I had succeeded, saved the world, ended the plague, or whatever impossible feat I dreamed my war was achieving. Soon I left the roads and started pushing myself across overgrown fields, heading far from the main avenues of civilization. To my delight, I entered a woodland, the ground still green and lush. Uninfected birds carried on amid the trees. What on earth had I been doing living in a junkyard this past week? Suddenly buoyed by the normalcy of this little spot, I powered on. Around 8, I arrived at the checkpoint I'd been aiming for, a township out in the sticks. All its farmlands were covered in new-growth trees, grown to adulthood with diomedian speed. This created a fantastically isolated huddle of some 30 buildings that I would have passed by without seeing had the tiny dirt road running west not guided me in. It was cool. I had grown so used to the heat radiating from the ground that I was shocked to lay my feet on ordinary mud again. Like everything, the difference was probably something to do with the new dominant life form on this planet, but I preferred my heat ray theory. I think if I'd been in the little town of Osterville back when the Troubles were still in full swing, I would have fit right in. You see, this was a settlement of scientists, or amateur scientists, eager to see what the end of the world could do for them. The first of their many experiments was beside the road on the edge of town. A square mound had been piled up and covered with soil, about as high as I was tall, and thrice as long down the sides. On top, tall and proud stalks of corn stood, some bearing their overgrown crops, others looking brown and ill. I took in the harvest, and as I was doing so, realized what this mound they had grown on must be. I descended and foolishly dug at the side of it. Yep, definitely a hand, not at all decomposed, and surely plenty more further in. The worst thing, the hand wasn't entirely still. I think I disturbed it. I held my breath for some reason, and brought a paving slab from across the street to patch over the bit I'd dug at. Well, it seemed the people of Osterville were all doing their bit for the community. I cautiously advanced further, with the sniper rifle ready, just in case the miracle corn farmer remained at large. I got to the other end of the main road peacefully enough. The corn scientist, if alive, wasn't home, and my next sideshow proved this without a doubt. It began when I noticed more corn growing in the yard of a 3-story blue house, its roof partially collapsed. I went over to steal it for good measure, and saw the yard also had a red cage big enough to hold an elephant, its door open. Grace, it said in pink sparkly letters over the door. It was enough to intrigue me into the house's basement, which was through an open door down the stairs in the yard. The place had a mixed stench. The usual stench of death was strong, yet there were also other, more alive stenches. I'm not an expert, just saying I knew something was not entirely dead in that place even before I hit the light switch. By luck, the tubes buzzed on, revealing a series of red cages, smaller than the one out back, most of which had resident boars. Another boar was free, sitting in the corner and looking at me without emotion. Well, I guess I'm not an expert in pig emotion either. I gingerly stepped forward, ignored by most of the inmates. The one in the corner, who I imagined was their leader and probably the only one who could magically talk, had nothing to say. Thus I explored deeper. At the far end of the basement was a big machine with controls that looked ancient by electronic standards. The death smell was strongest here. I think it was a meat processor of sorts. Behind it, a load of hay bales had been used to mark out a corner that was inundated with blood and guts. Bones stuck up from the lake of coagulated red. Boar bones, probably. I was becoming an expert on that kind of thing pretty fast. I don't think they'd been eating this stuff, nor do I think the reason the cages were full of still alive boars with no food or water was unrelated to this. This was another scientific trial. Could have been making magic fertilizer, or maybe immortal apathetic boars was the end goal. They definitely achieved one thing though: Grace. I met Grace when I went up into the main house. She was the daughter of the family, dressed in a college cheerleading costume, designed to show off her toned, fluorescent green body. She took repeated blasts from the shotgun to knock down, then I put the barrel up to her face and fired again. Calmed her down. Her body just lay outside her bedroom. On the door, Grace was written in the same sparkly letters as the cage outside. Just inside the door was a cage that filled almost the entire room, with usual bedroom possessions thrown inside. The cage entrance was off its hinges, and there was a hole ripped out of the wall. Further to this, in the hallway outside, there were messages written on the walls in black marker, explaining how to feed Grace, then below instructing dosage for medicines. The instructions were aimed at the rest of the family, I think, who I met here and there about the house briefly. A picture hanging on the wall depicted a thin-haired man with goggles and a lab coat. Didn't see any zombies like that, though, and I searched the whole house. The downstairs had been dedicated to brewing chemicals, with a mix of clinical grade and makeshift equipment. Samples of the medicine were lined up in cut-open juice boxes on the kitchen floor. Plastic-looking capsules that had a pink powder inside. I didn't take any. Question was the medicine meant to be a cure, or had I seen the result of the experiment's success? I think I might have, and that this could be linked to the absence of the man himself. He'd also been up to something with the corn, evidenced by a single plant growing in a glass tube in the living room. The ceiling above it had been removed, making space for a ventilation shaft to come from a machine upstairs and output into the tube. The corn had cobs, but the seeds were red. Super corn. I mean, if humans could be made to mutate into special monsters, the corn version of the diomedian infection probably could too. Much less sinister, at least. The barely legible writings of the missing host indicated that this Corn 2.0 could be used as a powerful fuel or industrial adhesive if refined correctly. First infinite food, now infinite fuel. This guy really was advancing civilization. Shame your Hulk kid broke out of her cage. I'd gotten so caught up in wandering about that crazy house that I lost track of time. It was already 5, and it was a mist night. I quickly ate, and had to decide whether to hold up in that very house. It was probably the right choice, but I didn't make it, since I was creeped out, and was paranoid about what would happen if I led a bunch of zombies in here and they ate the mutation pills. And a little bit I didn't want to wreck this guy's house with a battle. There was still the chance he was a good guy, the hero of this town. Not stopping to dig out more locals to interview on the topic, I rode off into the woods, heading south. I figured I could reach the next township on my southeasterly trail, and I was right. I rode a little faster, a little easier every day. Yep, I didn't need those pills at all. At 7:30 I was at a larger town, also hidden in the flourishing woods. There was a police training camp here, the main building of which had an urban combat shooting range. I originally went in to look for bullets, then decided to hole up in that range, since it was ringed by concrete walls, and was deliberately furnished with towers, obstacles, and creaky floorboards. One of the concrete towers had a load of zombies sleeping at its base. It was the perfect chance to use a stick of dynamite I'd found under the counter at the front office. Yep, that's a middle-of-nowhere police academy for you. Anyway, I lit the fuse and threw it into the pile of flesh. It blew up way bigger than I expected and knocked me over. Weird thing was the zombies stayed pretty intact, while the concrete wall shattered and the tower leant over, just barely staying up. Okay. One day, bullets weren't going to get through their skin. Wasn't that day now, luckily enough. The moment I had to start running around the training ground, shooting invaders, I realized how tired I was. My adventure in Osterville had cost me nap time. I was flagging from the very beginning, whereas the zombies were passionately smashing the plasterboard set pieces apart. Here's the good news. The place was so maze-like and unnatural that I once again benefited from the stupefaction of the horde. Simply being on the second floor of a poorly imitated building forced them to mull around assessing the situation. They were learning pattern by pattern, and this one was just new enough to switch them off. After midnight, I settled down against a pile of sandbags on the roof of a sturdy-looking fake building and practically dozed off. I wasn't disturbed until just before 4, when a couple of the visitors figured out the stairs and ladders below. Too late then, though, as the fading mist chilled everyone out. I had one more job: kill them all. I figured that if these ones had been learning the ropes of this particular environment, killing them off might set them back. No, that's not how it worked. Bacteria left its mark all over the place, and so never again would that particular arrangement stump them. Needed an ever-shifting maze of mirrors to vex them forever. My destination wasn't going to be quite that, but we can't all be as clever as me. At around 8 in the morning, I was done looting bullets and set off south. The safety cell and its various surprises awaited.